You imagine the amount of savings in insurance. Insurance premiums for developers and builders are going to crash because of what we're doing. Like this, literally, everybody wins except for the systems that have been milking everybody for years.
You're listening to Ice Cream with Investors, a podcast that is dedicated to teaching you how to better invest your money so that you can live a more intentional life. I'm your host, Matt Four, and it is my goal to teach and empower you to remove the roadblocks to your financial success.
All right, Damion, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here, man. Ready for some ice cream?
Absolutely. Well, we like to start with the difficult questions here. What is your favorite ice cream?
You know, there's a point in my childhood, every birthday was mint chocolate chip, and then something changed and went to peanut butter chocolate. And I think that's just because peanut butter is one of those things that you can't get enough of.
Yeah, I love it. Our kids are like starting to be in the mint chocolate chip phase. I loved it as a child. And I didn't think anybody else loved it, but I guess the more and more I host the show, the more I'm like, yeah, it's actually a pretty popular flavor.
Mm-hmm.
Well, tell our listeners, what's the scoop? What do you do today?
I'm disrupting things. For a long time, I was disrupting anything that was in my way. As an entrepreneur, I started a lot of companies, started 70 plus companies, including one that got me thrown out of college because I started a bookstore in the dorm, and the school got pissed off because I put the bookstore out of business. So it was actually kind of cool. And all the students loved me, but the administration was really irritated. So I was always going and finding things that seemed like there was a problem. Like an entrepreneur, we always just look for problems and want to solve them. Can't help it. It's in our blood. And over the years, as my skill set grew, as I screwed a lot of things up and became wiser, if you will, through the trauma, then it got to a point where I had some skills and some networks that enabled me to start building things at a much bigger level. And in the beginning, I thought I wanted to do that. I read Donald Trump's book in the late 90s, and I said, oh, I'm a real estate guy. Awesome. I'm going to make $1 billion. But I had, a $100,000 mentality. And so I made my 100,000, 200,000, made a few million, and then lost 25 million. So I really hadn't caught up. Like my money went past my mental temperature and my financial temperature. And so once I caught up with that and pushed back or pushed to where there was an alignment, it was interesting because the people around me really became aligned, and it was the right people. And then all of a sudden this magic started happening.
Yeah, I was reading some of your bio, and I understand you bought your first house on a Visa cash advance. Is that right?
Super dumb idea. Yeah, I totally did that. I broke into real estate. I had an insurance agency, and I said, wow, I can make $1 billion in real estate, so I'm going to do that. A friend of mine said, I got a deal for you. And I said, great. Why are you telling me? He said, because I need money. And I'm like, man, I'm a broke insurance agent. I just started. I don't have any money. He said, yeah, but you have a credit card. So in my brilliance at whatever I was, 22 years old, I said, sure. So I literally took a cash advance on the Visa, took over a house, and then proceeded to almost go bankrupt about 4 months later because I had no idea what I was doing. And I was getting in my own way. But that's how I got started, man. I took a really crazy move that is not something I recommend or condone. It's what I had. My creativity got a little bit out of control.
Yeah. Now, the credit card, did you just have a huge credit line, or were houses just that cheap back in the day?
So I had credit plus I had creativity. So what I did is somebody had a house that they needed to get out of. They owed more than it was worth, and so they couldn't sell it. And so and they were behind in payments. So I think I took a cash advance out for like $6,000 and then took over their mortgage, which is a common thing that you could do it's called subject to financing for people that don't know what that is. And basically you just take over mortgages. I did that for 20 or 30 houses in the beginning because I didn't have a job, so I couldn't qualify. I didn't really have any cash. And so I just had to get really creative. And unfortunately, one of the funny things is getting a lot of money too soon makes you really dumb. You stop thinking, and then you trade your money for experience. So fortunately, I kind of went in reverse, but still had some consequences because my ego took over.
Yeah, I heard a quote the other day. It's like, you are most vulnerable to make bad decisions after a big win because you almost feel like you're invincible and you can't make a mistake. And especially when it's on a credit card and a cash advance, you're like, hey, it's just monopoly money at that point.
Yeah, credit does that in a lot of ways. Back in 2006, 7, 8, when I had my real estate going in the wrong direction and things weren't working, instead of acknowledging the truth, I said, oh, well, I've got credit cards. And then at that point, 2007, you could call the credit card companies, Chase or Bank of America, and say, so I was thinking I'd like a raise on my credit card limit. And they'd say, sure, how much? And you're like, well, double. And they say, sure, here's another $100,000. And so you could do that with equity lines of credit on houses, all these things. More credit makes people pretty dumb too, because they think it's actually real money. All it is bondage, because you're borrowing from your future prosperity. So credit and cash and wins, I would say all of those tend to make you dumber. It's the things that hurt you. And when you have, instead of a win, which we're talking about, when you have the loss, you shift it and it becomes a learning event. Then you really get better, stronger, faster, and you're able to launch. But success has never been something where I said, oh yeah, now I feel really humble and really smart and I'm going to be really rich or whatever. It's always gotten me probably into more trouble.
I just won a world championship. I'm not going to Disney World. I'm just going to be very humble about this win.
One thing about that, Tim Grover talks about this in Resilience, and he talks about the people like Kobe and these basketball players that he's coached. He did a lot of mental coaching with these guys, and when you look at them, they win a championship and they're like, "Cool, got it." Or Elon, same thing. Oh, richest man in the world, got it. Back to work. I mean, they go back to train. There's a celebration moment for about 5 seconds, and they treasure it. They get sprayed with champagne, and then they're back training. Man, they're like, this is what champions do. The cleaners, the closers, the people that are actually getting it done. They're not, giving themselves accolades and saying, "Please praise me." The true champions are the ones that are out there saying, "Okay, this is the process. It's not an outcome. I'm still in the process."
Yep. Now, I think I read that you scaled your portfolio to about 150 doors. Is that correct?
Yeah, a little different than what a lot of people are doing these days with doors. So these were doors that were not attached. It's one thing to buy an apartment for 150 units, and it's another to buy 150 houses, which is how I started. That's a lot of brain damage, and it wasn't just in one place; it was in 7 states. So having stuff, which is not a good idea either. Like, I'll give you a lot of things to not do. In fact, my first book back in like 2004 or 5. Was Maverick Mistakes in Real Estate Investing, the lessons I learned and the mistakes I made at the School of Hard Knocks and the University of getting the crap kicked out of me. And that book was literally about all these things that I did that nobody should ever do, including having a house here and then a house 100 miles away and a house 500 miles away. It worked because I about killed myself grinding, but it ultimately is a very, very poor strategy. There's $1 billion in your backyard. And if you can remember that, you stay focused, then you won't wear yourself out just logistically.
Yeah, even in California, people are doing rehabs, fix and flip, subject to everywhere. So even some of these difficult markets to do real estate in, somebody is doing deals and making it happen.
There's always somebody making money. And you just have to understand that the mainstream is not going to ever be where the real money is. It's on the edges. If you do what everybody's doing, you're going to get what everybody gets. And so you've got to be willing to go say, okay, who's getting what I want, and then model it or get really good and prepare for a lot of damage if you're going to be an outlier and start something new, because new people have a lot of arrows. The people that are out there in the frontier, that they're getting arrows, and so that you have to choose. Do you want to be? I mean, we're being pretty bold with my project now, and that's been the same case for the last decade. And you do get a lot of attack and everything, but that's how you really change the world. That's how you disrupt things.
Yep. Now, I think I read in 2008 you had a little bit of a struggle. Take us through that period of your life, and then I want to get into the some of the stuff you're doing more recently.
I think some people are going to think that a little bit of a struggle is going to be an understatement of the century based on what happened. But I guess it's all relative. In 2006 and 7, I ended up looking at some projects that were beyond my capacity or really what I knew anything about. But I thought, I'm 10 feet tall and bulletproof. And I went in and took on these projects, condo developments, apartment rehabs, things that I didn't have anybody on site. I didn't have any experience or any team experience. So over a period of 12 months, I took 7 projects that were supposed to make me about $1 million each and lost more than $1 million on each one of them. And ultimately my portfolio went from 20 million to negative 5 million in a year. So not only was the money gone, but I mean, knocked the crap out of my self-confidence. I lost my house, my girlfriend, my dog. I was thinking recently, I probably should have moved to Nashville and written a country song or an album about this whole thing because I was living it. It was crazy.
Yeah, we'll take you here in Nashville, but I think there's quite a few people ahead of you that have written that song or are trying to write that song down here.
It wasn't a new one, man. This is like a remix or remix or something.
So I think I've experienced a little bit of moderate success in my careers and my life in general. And that is one of my biggest fear. And I listen to some people who have sold companies net worth $40 million, and they still have that same fear too of having to go back, because the grind and the hustle that you have to get to that spot is totally different after you've been at that spot. So I'm just very interested, when you go to a negative $5 million net worth, kind of losing it all, how do you pick yourself back up and move forward?
Well, one of the gifts of doing that younger is that you don't feel like, God, there's no possible way I could ever do that again. You started doing it for a minute because it was so painful, and it took a number of years. It wasn't like in a week or a month or or 6 months later, I was ready to go. It took probably 5 years for me to actually say, okay, I'm willing to go out there and do something and risk something. I was playing it fairly safe and pretty hedgy, if you will, for a while. So I mean that was the process. If I had been 50 or 60 years old and that had happened, I don't think I would have ever done anything again, because there's an exhaustion factor. It's why it's such a dumb thing, I believe, to tell somebody young to go find and do something safe and secure. Because when you make mistakes, you want to do them young, when you actually have the energy to snap back. If you try to do it 20, 30 years down the road, most people will just give up. They just don't have the energy. It's my mom recently said that to me. She's just over 70, and she's like, I just don't have the energy like I used to. And that's pretty common. And so on the other side of that, when this all went down, I was right at 30. And so it took until I was about 35 for me to go through some things, spend a couple of years in therapy. And really, it was all about digging deeper into me and then shifting from this idea of making more money and getting more for me and taking from the world and harvesting. And it was really about becoming a farmer and serving other people and building great gardens and beautiful whatever, something that served humanity. And what I found when I mentally shifted that and said, okay, how can I serve in the way that my potential is built for? So not in a little way, but my maximum potential, like a tree does. A tree says, I'm going to grow, and it grows until it dies. And so I'm saying, what's my potential? And then you start really thinking bigger. And fortunately, after starting so many companies, I had a little bit of experience and knew that I needed people that were really smart and really experienced. And that's what helped to launch this stuff. It was that understanding, and then shifting away from self and being more selfless by serving more people.
But selfishly, in those 5 years, when you're going through therapy and trying to take on a new mindset, I mean, did you go to working a W-2? Did you start something new? Like, how did you transition from that financially?
What's really funny is that I'm not really that employable. I tried in that period of time. I volunteered for a political campaign in Connecticut with a guy named Peter Schiff, and who's still a friend. And it was really funny because I read a book that he wrote, and he ran for U.S. Senate, and he's an outlier. He's kind of like me, a little nuts. And so, or some people would say he's a lot nuts. He's funny. He's actually predicted 18 of the last 2 recessions. Like, he's just really good.
Yeah, that's exactly how I know him. Thank you for saying that.
And he's the exact same in real life. He's the most authentic person I've ever met. So I was on the campaign, and I went out there not just because I like Peter, but I was like, man, we got to change some things in America. We need somebody that's going to shut down the Senate and get this thing in order and bring the House, to a stopping point, so it stops spending us into bankruptcy. So anyways, I go out there, and like 6 months later, I was thinking about all the ways that we could win, and I kept coming up with ideas. And in politics, people want to stay in the system. They generally go into a campaign so that they do a good enough job to go to the next bigger campaign. Well, I didn't give a crap about any other campaign. This was the one and done. And so I'm trying to win. And they fired me. And I'm like, how do you fire me? I'm a volunteer. I don't even cost anything. So if I can get fired as a volunteer, the problem is I'm looking at things, and I say, there's a problem. I want to solve it. There's something we can do better. And most people that are working in jobs are not thinking and obsessing. I'm very Grant Cardone-ish in his book, Be Obsessed or Be Average. I don't do average. I do obsessed. So sometimes that's less than average, and sometimes it's way better than average, but I don't do anything light, and that really freaks a lot of people out. So I was definitely not in a W-2. I was still trying things, but one of the mistakes I made back then was I was trying a whole bunch of things at once, and so I wasn't really narrowly getting any traction on anything. And that was when I stopped that and said, okay, I'm going all in on X, which was the EQRP. Then all of a sudden traction started happening, and then ultimately it went vertical.
Many things wrong with our political system. I think the idea of just staying in the game so you can move on to the next campaign, the next election cycle, the next presidential candidacy, all those sorts of things is probably the biggest thing I see, is that if you're in the Senate and you've been there 20 years, all you think about is how can I win the next election? You don't think about what's the right thing to do. So I'm glad you kind of highlighted that, because I've seen some of that firsthand.
I've had an interesting experience a couple of years ago where I was involved romantically with someone in Congress, and I saw some things that most people don't see, and I realized how toxic and how horribly corrupt it is, that everything is for sale, everything is money. And as much as people will say it's not, when you actually follow the money and you see how people get into positions and how they buy their way through things and how they're positioning themselves into the next spot, you realize this is not what our founders had in mind. at all. It was supposed to be citizen legislature. People went there and then they went back to their real life. And people have made this their whole life and a launching pad for more wealth. So that doesn't really serve the public, and it's why we have a broken system, because of that mentality and the ability for people to be there beyond serving. And it's they serve themselves, even though they'll claim otherwise.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned EQRP. So for our listeners out there, we're going to be talking about qualified retirement plans and some different ways that you can leverage them outside of the Wall Street systems and the 401ks that you're probably familiar with today. But if you would just take a step back, what is EQRP? Why'd you get started? And we'll kind of dig in from there.
So what I noticed just over a decade ago, I was listening to my dad before he passed away, and he wasn't really doing so great in his retirement. And right before he died, like, he just didn't have a lot of resources. He played the game. He was in the military, served his country for 20 something years. And then his retirement account was pretty lame. And I thought, well, why is that? And then I started looking around and I realized most people, they're outliers, but the masses of people, I mean, the average 401k or 403b or whatever you might have, depending on your job or working in the government, is not very much. It might be 100 or 200 or 300. Even if it's 500,000, it doesn't really matter, because that's not enough. And the problem is people don't know what the rules are, and they really just hope it'll all work out. So I looked at this stuff and I started thinking about it, and I was selling some gold and silver at the time. And somebody said, I'm going to buy some silver with my retirement account. And I said, that's cool. I bet more people in their retirement account would like to buy some silver. So I started digging into this. I ended up writing a couple of books about it. And I said, there is a gap in the market. People don't realize they can use retirement accounts, these qualified plans that are basically tax shelters, whether it's 401ks or IRAs. They can use that for stuff beyond Wall Street. They can buy things that they can control, they can hold, they can buy apartments, they can buy into syndications with other people, they can buy Bitcoin, they can buy physical gold and silver. I mean, so the question is, well, what can't you do? There's only a few things you can't do, but almost everything we invest in, you can use a retirement account for, and then you can do it tax-free if you start using the Roth. So people don't know about this. And I was like, man, I got to tell there's these little teeny companies that were selling little plans and not to make light, not to, crap on them, but nobody was taking it and really pushing it out there and pushing the education. And I was like, well, there's a gap. There's a lot of people that would like to do this. They've just never heard of it. And so I said, I'm going to do this different. I'm going to give people more options, more control, more liability protection. And so we're going to enhance the system. And so the EQRP was born, the Enhanced Qualified Retirement Plan. And then I went out there and I went everywhere. I was, like on hundreds and hundreds of podcasts and seminars and educating people, and published books and sent out tens of thousands of books, and really put this in the public, the language of the public. There's a term for that. The people started talking about it. The public discourse, just like it wasn't something that was so mysterious. People were like, oh yeah, I've heard about that. So more and more people started hearing about it, talking about it, and sharing it. And then the company started growing and ultimately became a thing that was more and more common, but it's still only a micro fraction of the population. I think there's tens of thousands of qualified plans that are not just Wall Street, but there are millions and millions of plans that are Wall Street. So most of the $40 trillion in these plans is still all in Wall Street, and it doesn't have to be. It could be out of Wall Street jail if people know they have choices.
Yeah, so let's dig in a little bit there. But before we do, I want to highlight that there's a famous example out there of Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel invests $500,000 into Facebook. Now that $500,000 in a Roth plan privately in a Series A pre-seed round is now worth over $5 billion. So he's got $5 billion in his Roth IRA tax-free. And if you're looking at your Roth IRA, I'm sure that number is a little bit bigger. But why doesn't Wall Street offer these types of plans? Why don't they allow you to do things like buy gold, silver, invest in apartment syndications, things like that?
Wall Street's job is to tell you that you're too dumb to manage your money. Its job is to say, you need to give us control because we're smart. We have these quants and we're sophisticated. We have all these initials behind our name that we're not even sure what they mean, or we just made them up or whatever. But the reality is nobody's going to care about your money more than you do. What they care about is the fees. They care about this never-ending series of fees. And it's funny because if you think about the conversations you might have or you could have with a Wall Street advisor, what are they going to say? It's never time to sell. It's always time to dollar cost average. It's always time to put more money in. Why? Because they want to have this never ending AUM, assets under management, where they get fees. And most of it's automated. Most advisors, their job is to be psychologists, therapists, or your friend that's consoling you when the stock market crashes. They're not that sophisticated. Most advisors, they're not out there making tons of money trading or doing Peter Lynch type of things. They're simply out there selling their ability to console you and to be your buddy. And so why does Wall Street not want to tell you about these things? It doesn't want the money to go away. And when it goes into something like gold or silver or Bitcoin or an apartment, a Main Street type of thing, all of a sudden they don't get to either control the money, they don't get to fee you. So they're going to tell you what? It's super risky. Don't do that. You need to have a well-balanced portfolio of stocks and bonds. That's like all paper. That is incredibly risky. And you have absolutely no control, and you can't really touch it, and you can't really get to people that are in the leadership. So that's why people do it. It's also because there's incredible lobbying. So when you hear about things like there's a rule that changed a number of years ago, not too long ago, that opted people in automatically into 401ks instead of them having to opt in, it opted them in. Most people do whatever is the automatic. They don't change anything. So where did that come from? That was Wall Street lobbyists that pushed Congress to change the rule. So it's like all these things are set up for you to lose and for Wall Street to win. I mean, there's a reason that the banks and the financial advisory services, why they have giant buildings and why the leadership is making tens and hundreds of millions of dollars a year. It's because that system is stacked against you, not in your favor.
Yeah. So just to highlight, if you have a 401k plan today, it's through Fidelity, Schwab, Merrill Lynch, Vanguard, any of the big boys out there, they do not offer these plans. And the reason why is because they want it to stay in the system. You have to go to a company like Damion's at EQRP to do those and to set those up. So you mentioned some of the different ways that we can do it. What are the restrictions or the gotchas about transferring my IRA dollars into a qualified self-directed account?
So, and I want to make a distinction around self-directed. There's a lot of brokerages that offer self-directed IRAs, self-directed or solo 401ks. And they'll say, oh yeah, we offer this. And the advisors will say, oh yeah, you can self-direct. You can pick what you want to invest in. And that's true. They'll give you a list of stocks that you can invest in, and they're still stuck there. So it's really funny that people will say, well, they're doing the same thing and their thing is free. And I'm like, it's not the same thing. That's literally like saying a Ferrari is the same thing as a Ford. Yeah, they both have 4 tires. That's about where it ends. So it's the same thing with Fidelity. What you can do there is pick one of their things that they're selling you that they're going to make money on. What happens when you switch over and you end up with an EQRP is you can do all the stuff that they've offered, plus you can do all these other things like gold, silver, apartments, real estate, Bitcoin. And what can't you do? You can't invest in things that you're going to benefit from. Like you can't be a real estate agent, get a commission on a house you buy with your retirement account. You can't invest with your parents or your kids, but you could invest with your brothers, sisters, cousins. So there's some people that you can't invest in with, and there are certain things like you can't flip a car. For some reason, Matt, all these people will say, well, can I flip a car? And I'm like, first off, why would you want to flip a car? But they do. They want to flip a car. So I say, no, can't flip a car. They go, what about wine? What about art? The answer is no directly. However, you could buy an art gallery. So, there's ways to do this. That's one of the really fun things about being so high touch. There's a lot of companies that are selling solo 401ks and self-directed IRAs that are very high tech, and they have apps. What they don't do is get really into the weeds and help you navigate and help you think through things. Whereas we have this team of people that are super savvy. And when you say, oh, I want to do this, we say, you can't do it this way. Here's a way that you could do it. And so we give people, there's a community and a lot of coaching and mentoring that happens, which is incredibly important. This is just a tool. And if you don't, like a lot of things that are software based are just tools, and you get them, you're like, cool, I got a tool. How many times have you gotten software and you're like, I don't know how to start the thing? And then you don't do anything. We were talking about this with all of our equipment, with mics and things. You get them, you're like, well, how do I work this? Or it's unplugged. That's the same thing with a lot of these financial tools. People get them, they get all excited. They go, oh, there's companies that it's a really cool app. It's very pretty. And then they get the tool and they're like, I have no idea what to do. I'm a little scared. If you make mistakes, there are penalties. If you invest in IRA and real estate, you could get triggered with UBIT tax. And then you go, wait, what the hell is UBIT tax? And so people do these things. And then what happens is when they have people like at EQRP that are able to say, okay, here's how we're going to make sure you don't pay UBIT tax, which, by the way, is when you invest in real estate, there's usually debt, which is why we like real estate. And if you invest a retirement account in real estate or an apartment or whatever, and there's some debt there, there's a tax that happens if you use an IRA that can be up to 37% tax on all the leveraged profits. So that's terrible, except when you realize that an EQRP is exempt from that and you can roll the IRA into an EQRP and go to zero, then all of a sudden you're like, why in the world would I ever do an IRA? And the answer is you wouldn't, but you just didn't know better. So when you have better facts, you make better decisions. And really, people they didn't know the facts.
What is the way around UBIT? So again, UBIT is this idea that if you take out debt using qualified money, you have to pay a certain tax on the profit that you made from that debt. But you sound like you have a nice little trick up your sleeve on how you get around that.
It's funny if you just read the code, which, obviously everybody should read the code.
Why would I do that?
Exactly. That's a terrible idea. No, it'll actually probably put you to sleep or give you brain damage. There's only about 20,000 pages of it. So, but that's part of how I wrote the QRP book was I read tax code. And I mean, I'd wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm like, what about this? And I'd look it up and I'd do research until 6 a.m., get excited, fall asleep. And this is like my life. It's a little weird.
Yeah, we have a no brag policy on this show.
Yeah. I don't know if that's bragging or like insinuating my insanity, but, I looked at these things, and IRAs were built under code 408. It's part of the tax code. 401ks and qualified plans like the EQRP were built under section 401, and they have different exemptions. Well, one of the things that was weird years ago, you had a lot of pensions and 401k, big piles of money, institutions that said, we want to invest in giant real estate projects. And so their lobbyists, this is what happened. The lobbyists went and got an exemption for this tax. On the other hand, the IRAs did not have those same lobbyists. So what the IRS was saying and Congress was saying was, well, we don't want to have people using a bunch of leverage and then making way too much money in their retirement accounts, like Peter Thiel. Like, they were looking at it from that perspective. So they said nobody can do it in their IRAs. But these big money pension plans were able to get an exemption, and the 401ks fall under that. So if your 401k offers the option to do real estate, which they're not if they're at Fidelity or whatever, but if it's an EQRP, you can do that. It's just a funny thing. And I didn't make this stuff up. This has been in the code for decades. Yeah. It's just kind of funny because I get to share it and people are like, nobody told me that. I'm like, why would they have told you that? First off, they haven't read the code. And secondly, it didn't make it's not useful for them to know that information, but it's very useful for you to know, because when you have a big win in real estate and then you get a tax bill for something inside of an IRA, it's really irritating.
Yeah, because you got to pay for that outside of the IRA if you want to pay for that tax, I would assume.
Yeah, that's usually what happens. What happens is people are like, yeah, I got this big win. They go reinvest it, and then they get a tax bill and they have no liquidity and they got to pay for it. So there are huge problems. And the other problem is a lot of people that are putting together apartments and syndications and such don't know about it, or they just ignore it. They don't tell their investors, and then their investors find out later, and either they get audited or they get penalized. I mean, it's brutal to not know about this. And the cool thing is there's an easy fix.
Yeah. Having a big win with no liquidity reminds me of the people that win and get really excited about cars on game shows. It's like, oh yeah,
right,
tax bill's coming pretty soon. Hope you plan to sell that car to get that tax bill paid. But so the way I understand it correctly, if you use a self-directed or qualified plan in a solo-directed 401k plan, then you get different tax treatment than if it's an IRA, Roth IRA.
Correct. Yeah, IRAs are different. Yeah, it doesn't. I don't care how smart people. Some of the smartest accountants in the country literally had no idea this was even a thing, and this is what they do. And so it is news to people. The IRAs and the 401ks are out there treated different.
So if I'm listening to this show and I'm about to leave my job, I get severed or whatever the case may be, I have that 401k plan there. Wall Street guy taps me on the shoulder. He says, hey, you should just convert that to an IRA. You'll be good to go. Is there an ability to convert that 401k into the qualified plan that you're mentioning?
Yeah, so that's actually probably more often than not what people do. They have a collection of 401ks from previous employers, whether it's 1 or 10. I mean, we have people that come in with 15 or 20 because apparently they just didn't like staying at any job for very long.
They also are unemployable.
Probably. It's like, okay, you've had 52 different jobs. Maybe we shouldn't hire you. So like people will typically take their 401ks, their Wall Street 401ks, and we roll them over tax-free, penalty-free into an EQRP. At that point, they have the ability, they have a checkbook, which is legal. It is illegal with an IRA. You cannot have a checkbook with an IRA. That the courts changed that with McNulty a few years ago. So in an EQRP, you have a checkbook and you also have the ability to do all the same stuff that you did in Wall Street. So it doesn't restrict anything. We're just adding options. And then you have a team to guide you, not a financial advisor that's trying to sell you.
One of the questions I often get, though, is I'm working at a company today. I have a 401k plan. I want to move that 401k plan into something else so that I can go buy real estate or syndications or whatever. Can you do that if you are under a current fund administrator?
Usually not. It's called an in-service rollover while you're still in service. And so you can do it if it's allowed in the plan and you're a certain age. There was an exception during COVID that allowed people to do up to $100,000 and pull it out for financial reasons. A lot of people did that. So from time to time, Congress does things that allow those options. Most of the time, you're going to have access to that money after you leave the job. And what people do is they do the default. They either keep it where it is, they roll it into their new job's 401k, or they move it into an IRA because somebody on Wall Street is telling them this is what you should do, not for you, but for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, one of the things that I found interesting about these plans is the ability to take more or put more in them than your standard maximum limit. I think in 2024, it's 23,500 if you're single that you can put into these plans. But I know you have some different ways that we can actually shove more money into these plans. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah. So when you're doing self-employed stuff, when you're making money, and this could be a million different things: mowing lawns, flipping houses, like it doesn't make consulting. There's the ability for an individual to put around 70,000, depending on whether you're above or below 50 years old. So let's say it's 70,000, and then people are able to do that with spouses and kids. So we've had many families, family of four, that are putting $250,000 away each year, using that as a tax strategy, and then ultimately getting that converted to Roth, which means that money grows tax-free and you spend it tax-free. And then it even goes past the generation when somebody inherits it for another 10 years tax-free. So when people are trying to figure out their taxes, one of the things you should do is just figure out how to get to a 0% tax bracket and quit trying to screw around with cheating the IRS. Just use the Roth. Like it's one of the most underutilized things in the tax code. And you mentioned it right up front, which is awesome. You're the only host in 1,000 different shows that's ever said that. I'm usually the one that brings it up. So it's really cool that you knew about that. Peter Thiel is brilliant, and he is not rich because he's dumb or he went and did a traditional Wall Street thing. There's a reason that Congress is saying we should limit these things. We should limit the amount that you can have in a retirement account. It's because of Peter Thiel. Elizabeth Warren got really pissed off because Peter Thiel made billions and he's never going to pay taxes on it. So it's one of those things. The tax code keeps evolving because you get more progressive people. And the reason I'm saying that is if there's a tax advantage that you can take advantage of now, a loophole or just the tax code, you should probably do it, because what happens is typically those things change and they grandfather people in. A great example is it used to be that if you inherited a Roth retirement account, you got to use that and spend it and grow it the rest of your life. And if you inherit one, it's 10 years, because they said, well, shoot, somebody could inherit this when they're 20 years old and they could spend the next 60, 80 years growing it and spending it tax free. That's not fair. So they keep changing things, but they grandfather in typically the people that already had it. So Roth accounts, I think, will go away at some point in the future. And it's very unlikely they're going to get past the people that have them. So if you don't have one, it is a very smart thing to have one and at least get something in it.
Yeah, you've opened up a can of worms that I typically like to talk about, which is this idea of like, when should you pay tax if you owe tax? And I'm just a big fan of like, you might as well just pay it now. It's better to pay the tax on the seed rather than the harvest. And if you are going to move things into these plans, it's not really a tax avoidance situation, because if you do out some of the projections and all those sorts of things, you're ultimately going to be paying about the same amount of tax over time, unless you move it into a Roth, because then you're paying the tax up front and you're sheltering the growth long term. So I'm a big fan of how can I shove as much money into that Roth as possible.
Hey, fellow investors, before we dive into our next segment of the show, I wanted to take a quick moment to talk to you about a fantastic opportunity for you to invest with me. As you know, here at Ice Cream with Investors, I'm passionate about real estate investing and helping you navigate the exciting world of wealth creation through real estate. And that's why, for the first time, I'm thrilled to tell you about an opportunity for you to invest alongside of me. Over the past 3 years, I've been investing in multifamily, mobile home parks, car washes. I've even become the bank and lent out money to fellow real estate investors on a short-term basis. And now you can come join me. If you would like to jump on a call and learn more about this opportunity, head to icecreamwithinvestors.com/invest and find a time for us to connect. And now back to the show.
Why? So ask yourself, it's really funny because people will say, well, yeah, but my financial advisor said the opposite of what Matt's saying. And why is that? Because financial advisors want, it's AUM. It's exactly right. And so there's two things. There's two fallacies to that argument that you should wait and have tax deferred. One is that you don't play by their rules. Like, it's not about their income. But the other thing too is that assumption is saying the tax rates are going to be the same, and they're assuming that you're going to be broke when you retire. The reality is, if you actually have a rich mentality and you have a plan to become rich, you're going to be in the highest tax bracket. So why would you pay taxes in the lowest tax bracket possible, which is the earlier years, plan to be rich. And then when you're making however much you're making, hundreds of thousands or millions a year, it's at zero. So like your plan is the right plan. In my opinion, there is no exception unless you want to be broke when you retire.
Yeah. Well, I don't mean to be conspiratory or anything like that, but I think I've seen enough in Latin American countries when their governments start to go broke and they need to find some tax dollars. The first thing they typically do is look at some of these loopholes or sheltered accounts and things like that they can go pull from. And if you look at the IRA and 401k, not Roth accounts, you haven't paid tax on that money. So they could go levy a tax on that now at a higher rate. And basically you're making a deal with the government that, hey, I don't care what you charge me. I just don't want to pay it today. Whereas a Roth, yes, absolutely, they can go make those arguments and that you could make that argument that they could do the same there. But you have already paid tax on that money before it goes in there. So now you're looking at a double taxation situation.
And there's a lot of wealth that's in Roth accounts. A little funny, the fact, do you remember back in the late 90s, I think it was 99, when the Clinton administration balanced the budget with Congress and they were all proud of each other? And do you know why that happened?
No, I don't actually.
So that was the year that the Roth got introduced and you could convert deferred money into Roth. So what happened? All the wealthy people took their money, converted it. What happened? They paid tax. Massive surge of revenue to the US government that was supposed to happen over the next 20, 30, 40 years. They screwed the future and they all ended up in Roth accounts. And, oh, look, we balanced the budget. No, you didn't. You just stole from the future. So like that's just what happens. You're exactly right.
I'm gonna have to go look into that because I did not know that, and that's very interesting. And my first mind goes to this idea of repatriation back in 2018. Like we all thought that repatriation was going to flood down to workers and boost economic productivity and all that. I think I read a stat the other day, like more than 75% of that went to stock buybacks. So all you did was kind of increase the shareholder value and increase our market caps of some of our largest companies.
Yeah, welcome to Congress. They do things that they're told to do by their overlords and puppet masters, and that makes certain wealthy people really rich. And it's never. I mean, it's like the title for legislation is literally the opposite of what the legislation does. Yeah. You know, so like the Patriot Act was about the most unpatriotic thing that's ever been written. So it's just that's consistent. You're exactly right about that.
I'm also looking at Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Sorry, just nice
okay.
There.
No, it's like that. That was one of the most historical things when that came out. I was like, of course that's what they called it because it's the exact opposite of what's going to happen. And guess what? Big surprise, it happened.
Yeah. We haven't even talked about FrameTech, so I want to give you an opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about what you're doing today over at FrameTech.
So FrameTech is what happens when you spend 25 years, build 70 companies, build a huge, really interesting network, and then you finally get ready. And then, so luck is when opportunity meets preparation. I think that's a Chinese saying or something. And truly, this opportunity showed up. And the best part about this, 3 years ago when it showed up, a dear friend of mine of many decades says, "I have a deal for you." And this is really funny. He says, "I need to show it to you." And I said, "Great, email it to me." I mean, this is 2021. Email is pretty normal. He's like, "No, I need to show it." So he flies to Dallas and brings me this stack of papers. And I was like, "Hey, really? Okay, fine." So I look at this deal and I look at the front page and I put it away. And my partner and I back in Alabama said, "All right, focus on other things." So for 6 months, ignored it. And then we finally looked at it and we said, "There's no way this is real. This is a really cool idea. It'll disrupt the construction industry." Construction industry hasn't had really any innovation of substance since 1954 when the nail gun was invented. And so we're like, all right, this industry sucks. It's like education and government. Nothing changes. And that's they all take about the same amount of time to change, like 50 years is the average. So we finally looked at this and we said, there's something wrong here. The numbers look crazy. This is like, these guys must be nuts, but let's go meet them anyway. So we flew out to Arizona, sat down and had lunch with these guys. And literally at the end of a 2-hour lunch, we said, "We're in. We'll bring you the $40 million. And they said, "Thank you." They walked away and they said, "You guys are full of crap." There's no way that over lunch that just happened. And we started funding. We brought our community together, all the people that we had built trust and relationships with. And we said, "Here's what we've got. This is the best deal we've ever seen. And we are all in on this." And people said, "Okay, we're in too." Because there's a deep level of trust, which is what makes Stephen Covey was so right. The business, the speed of trust, that's how things get done fast with almost no friction. So things started moving and shaking. And And we started building this thing. And what we're building is a completely different way of framing. And it's what we've done is we've vertically integrated framing. We've done this inside of a manufacturing plant. So basically the way it works, somebody hands us plans for their house or their apartment. We take those plans, convert them. So this is a custom house. We're not doing manufactured where we have like one of 5 houses. This is literally, you bring us the plans and we build all the bones, the floors, the walls, the trusses. We build them in our system, in our manufacturing plant with patented technology that has been patented. And then we take all these pieces and we bring them to the job site, our team, and then we frame your house. Normally that process of framing takes a couple months. In our process, the whole thing takes 2 weeks. And it's not just the speed, it's the efficiencies. So normal 2,000 square foot house has about 3 dumpsters full of waste. When we do our process, the amount of waste we have will fit in one little trash can in your kitchen. So it's 99% less waste. So you start thinking about that and you go, well, that's really good for the environment, a lot less trees dying. It's also really good for efficiencies. Think about how much less you have to charge for the materials and the speed. How much more does it cost to take an extra 2 months to build? A lot more. So we've done all these things. This isn't like a 2% better thing. And this is going to disrupt the entire construction industry. And it creates a way better quality product because it's in a contained space. So like our tolerances are like 1/32 of an inch. So everything lines up. Everything is snapped to grid, and you just don't have that in the field. What you have in the field is people stealing walls worth of lumber in every house. What you have is warped things that are stuck in the wall and then covered up by drywall and board. So we looked at all the problems, electricians' problems, plumbers' problems, and we said, okay, everybody's problems. How do we fix all their problems and do it inside this thing? And the most painful part of building is the framing. Everything else has to happen like after that, other than the pad, the concrete. So we built this thing and we're about to go online. It's been the last couple of years we've been building. Our electricity for a lot of our equipment goes on literally next week, and probably already on by the time you see or listen to this. And then at the end of the summer, we'll be producing. So in record time, we're producing at our first plant. Our second plant comes online in the next couple of years, about 100 miles away. And then we have a rollout plan for the country. And literally the whole country, the whole industry is watching this thing and saying, is this real? And as soon as it goes on, they're going to go, oh crap. And I think a lot of them are already saying, oh crap, because construction industry doesn't innovate because it's like, hey, we can charge what we want to, and there's nothing that's going to stop us. We're disrupting that entire thing because we're better, we're faster, we can be more competitive, and our quality's better. So you literally can't compete with it. So it's about the coolest thing I've ever done, and it's truly going to serve humanity in such a big way that when you do something like that can serve millions of people, then you can imagine that the wealth effect, the side effect of the money is pretty much automatic when you serve that many people.
A couple things. One, Speed of Trust is by far one of the most overlooked leadership books out there. I'm glad you've read that because it's fan favorite over on this side. But you mentioned custom building. So I can literally roll you a 2,000 square foot house or a 10,000 square foot house, and you can build the framing in your factories. Is that what I heard?
We build the framing in the factories for any house, any wood house. This is not concrete. Cool. It's and apartments. You bring in a 500 unit apartment, and here's a crazy stat: 100 unit apartment that normally takes 10 months to frame takes us 2. So yeah, like just imagine the efficiencies and the amount of savings. And here's another thing: normally builders get sued. There's defects and everything, and when you have something that's built inside of a plant like we are, not only do you know that the tolerances are going to be very, very tight, but we're taking pictures of every joint. So we know where every board from every pallet that came from every lumber yard, where it's going to go, what wall, in what house, in what apartment. So it's like you imagine the amount of savings in insurance. Insurance premiums for developers and builders are going to crash because of what we're doing. Like this, literally, everybody wins except for the systems that have been milking everybody for years.
How do you scale then is my only question. Either you have a huge factory or you charge a premium to this. Like, how do you go scale?
So our first plant we'll put out about 3,000 houses, 3,300 houses a year to 2,000 or equivalent apartments. The second plant is a double plant, so it'll do double. So we'll have about 10,000 units that we'll be able to do in Arizona, which represents less than 10% of what you're going to build, what's being built here per year. Our next location is likely to be Texas. At that place, we're looking at 10 to 15 times the size. So how do we scale? We build more plants, and we keep doing it. It's a cookie cutter model. So When we do 10 to 15, it's literally the same plant, just 10 to 15 times over and over. So we're constantly innovating with ideas for the next plant, but the basic framework is we're doing it over and over again. If we could have 100 plants online right now, they'd all be busy. So it's like we can scale as fast as we can build. We're able to scale, but it's a little different than building software that you just duplicate and there's no additional cost. It's a big capital outlay and it takes a lot of time, which is why it hasn't been done before.
How do you ingest the architectural drawings and how long does it take to build the material? So here's where my mind is going, is that you know that every house has a 15-foot 2x4, so you just have a slew of those hanging out ready to go and kind of assemble it. Is that what it is, or do you have a process intake that makes that quick?
We have designers and engineers in-house that take the plans in. And so most likely, for the most part, you're going to see these plants building a lot of apartments and a lot of communities. So it's the same process for each. But if you have a community you have 6 different homes, but then you're doing 50 of each of them, obviously it's different because you don't have to design 50 different houses or 300 or whatever. So it's the same process. We take the designs in, we offer efficiencies in the design factor, and we'll come back. So there's a value add. There's so many value adds throughout this process, but you're not likely to have 3,300 different houses come in. It would obviously take a lot longer. The whole 2-week process is the process time for taking a house, putting it into our system, going back and saying, here are the changes we suggest, and then building it and then assembling it. So it's an incredibly efficient process.
And you assemble it on site, right? You ship it in pieces and assemble it on site?
Well, our trucks, our crews bring out all the pieces. They're all stacked a certain way so that they're very efficient and going off. That process on site takes 2 days. So it's like this whole thing it's really wild because it seems surreal because the industry has been doing the same thing for decades. It hasn't changed anything. And this makes it better for everybody. I mean, the idea of going out and standing in a harsh environment and being out there and building all these things one board by one board in the sun in Phoenix where it's 110 degrees or whatever for weeks and months on end, where you can go out there and do it in 2 days. And most of the stuff that's being done, most of the time is being done inside of a factory in air conditioning. So it's just, we're really changing the environment for people that are working as well. So it's like everybody's winning, all the stakeholders, the environment, the community. I mean, one of the cool things that we're doing that I thought, I came up with this and said, this is a great idea. And people are like, that's actually a really good idea. So one of the problems, and I hope more companies will do this, blue collar workers don't have the type of things that Google tech workers do. They don't have campuses with all the amenities. And a lot of blue collar workers have a real hard time with childcare. So one of the things that we're doing is not only are we building a cafeteria next to the plant, we're building a childcare facility so people can have lunch with their kids. They can go see their kids. They're not thinking about how they're going to get killed with a childcare cost because we're incorporating that all the time, racing to the childcare place. And then there's a penalty and like all that stress, we're just taking it out of the equation because our people are what matters. The community matters. The money takes care of itself when you serve all these people. And so this is going to be a first, I think, in America in how we're creating this culture with our team.
Thank you for doing that. As somebody now that sits on this side of the table with 2 kids, there's nothing worse than a snow day and having to figure out what you're going to do with the kids while you're also trying to do work. So that's amazing that you've kind of gone that extra step there.
It's just, you look at pain, like as an entrepreneur, I see pain everywhere. And I was thinking about, I was watching it with a lot of my people in Alabama with the EQRP company. There are a lot of kids and hearing their struggles with having to, like, I have to leave by 4:02 because if I don't get there, it's like $10 a minute. And then when there's a snow day and they're like, how do I work? And the amount of stress and then the cost. I mean, people are saying, well, do we work or we don't work? Because the one parent has to work just to pay for, childcare. And then they have like $400 left. Like, what's the point? So all these things make it brutal. And I'm like, okay, how do we solve that? Like the pain points, it's not just customers, it's literally the team. I mean, it starts with the team and then the team serves other people. So that mentality is what we hope to see more of and lead by example.
Amazing. Well, Damion, I want to switch us to our last round. We're calling this the 4 toppings. Our first one is, what is your favorite book or what is a book you've read recently that's given you a paradigm shift?
So I actually love the book called Mastery by George Leonard. There's 2 different ones. There's one by Robert Greene and there's one by George Leonard. George Leonard wrote this book. He's an Aikidoka. He's a martial artist like me. He died. But it's about the art of mastery in martial arts and in life. And one of the things that I think most people miss is this idea that they think they need to go to the end the finish line or the success, the moment. That's like, I'm going to retire, then everything will be good. And what people forget is that the whole point is to fall in love with the process, and your life is fulfilled, and there's this significance, and people are looking for this end moment. And mastery is about this never-ending pursuit of something like your best, your potential, and falling in love with that. So I fell in love with the book, and so I read it over and over again. And I always suggest that one because I think it leads towards a life of significance, not just success and shallow accomplishment that is fleeting at best.
I'm going to add that to the list because I think you're 100% right that people start at the starting line and they see the finish line. They want to be at the finish line and they think, oh, well, I'm just not passionate to go through the day-to-days and all that sort of stuff. And the passion comes from being in the day-to-day and just getting better, incrementally better.
Totally agree.
Our second one is, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I've heard this in different ways, but this idea that if you fail, you're somehow a loser or a failure. We've been indoctrinated with this belief system since we were kids in school. If you fail a test or you get 50% wrong, somehow you're a loser. I mean, truly, they kick you out and they ostracize you. You put you out in the woods. And in reality, if you think about the true world, the real world, not academic world, if you make 50% right, if you make 30 or 40% right in baseball, you're a Hall of Famer. If you make 50% right in business, you're a billionaire. I mean, probably if you make 30% right, you're a billionaire. And so it's exactly opposite of what we're taught. So the idea there, and what I'm getting at, is that you should be going out there learning how to learn from your mistakes, not learning how to make winning your whole thing. Winning doesn't, like we talked about earlier, doesn't really teach you the same way that learning does. And so if you say, well, I'm either going to win or lose, you're missing the point. The whole point is to go out there and forget about what people are saying, the judgment, which is everywhere now, it's social and such, but really understanding that this is how you grow and this is how you become whatever you're supposed to be, is stumbling and tripping and bleeding a little bit and realizing you're not going to die. When you learn about that and you actually practice that, everything changes.
I learn how to learn from your mistakes. It's something that I wrote down, and I'm going to have to give some thought to that because that might be some of the best pieces of advice, the best piece of advice I've heard in a very long time. So that was good.
Thank you.
Our third one is, what are you most proud of in your life?
I think that after 2008, the experience of losing what I thought was everything, I didn't lose my life, and nobody died. I did have a security guard at an apartment complex that died protecting copper, which was really disturbing and brutal. But in terms of that experience, I learned that no matter what happens, it's not going to eat me, and I have the capacity to go through it. So that was incredibly painful. I was afraid of that. I was told in the very beginning of my career that, well, before we do business, you need to go bankrupt at least twice. And I thought that was the dumbest thing. And what I realized after having lost all my money 3 times, I said, oh, they needed me to go through things to understand who I am. So I understood who I was, and I had the fortitude to be able to keep going. And sometimes it takes more than a minute, like it took years for me to go back and get in the game. It also taught me that no matter what happens, you can't learn less. You can't undo what you've learned. And so you take everything I've got away. You can't take my network away. You can't take my self-respect, and you can't take what the wisdom of all these years and all these things I've learned. So it builds up this incredible ability to have confidence and move in spite of not really knowing all the answers. You're like, look, but I trust me and I trust the people around me. So that's what I learned from that thing. I also, quite frankly, learned that it's always going to be better with others, the right others. It's just, it's either lonely or you're just not going to get very far if you're just by yourself.
Our fourth and final one is, if you could sit down and eat a bowl of ice cream with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
I've thought about this. I've had the question asked, who do you want to meet? And I've thought, there's cool people in history. And one of the things I never knew my grandfathers, and I never knew the people that came over, that crossed the ocean, that said, we're going to go. I mean, I don't know how much braver you have to be, or what's more scary than leaving everything, your culture, your language, your network, and going into a foreign place. I would love to have had the opportunity to spend time with my relatives, my great-grandfather, great-grandmother that came over from Italy, and just understand them, understand where I came from, understand their desire to have a better life for their families, and to be willing to risk everything and go for it. That would be a really cool conversation. And I just think we all have opportunities to connect with people, and then eventually they're gone because those people are gone. And that's one of the things that I've screwed up a number of times with people that have been alive, where I was too busy doing too many things that were really important at the time and really stupid later. And then those people died and that chance is gone. So the takeaway from that is if you've got people that you care about that you're just not really spending time with, I think it's always a good idea to find that time now, not later.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Well, Damion, fantastic conversation. Ton of value you've provided myself and our listeners. If our listeners, though, wanted to reach out to you, learn more about FrameTech, EQRP, where is the best place we could point them?
Best place to find stuff about FrameTech or EQRP is just go to the websites and check them out, frametech.tec.com, and EQRP is EQRP.com. You'll find me talking about those things on LinkedIn, and quite frankly, if you Google me, you'll find too much stuff. And I say that because there's like thousands of pages you get buried in. Like, what do I even focus on? I think if you focus on those two things, FrameTech or EQRP or both, FrameTech is the culmination. It was launched from the community in EQRP. So you'll see what passion and heart and 70 companies going through those really results in. I think that all that stuff had to happen beforehand. And I really truly believe that FrameTech is a model for both the construction industry, but really investing and business in general. And that's how we're looking at it. How do we be a model, an example for other people and businesses to say, okay, this is like best in class, best in the world. And we want to do that stuff in our space. And I'm just hopeful people take the best of what we're doing and they get inspired, and we have more than just this divisive attacking and all the other garbage that's out there. I think that this is all about hope and future prosperity.
Amen. Amen. Damion, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to Ice Cream with Investors. If you like what we serve you here, it would mean the world to me if you would like, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast app.